Hey all, Taves here, back playing some more Planet Zoo and back in Tiguidou Zoo. So this is the second of the new Oceania DLC animals. See, I said it right this time. And this is going to be the Tasmanian Devil, as you'd have seen from the title and the thumbnail. So we are continuing. There's loads going on with this habitat, and we're starting. I'm just going to jump straight into it, because why wouldn't you? So we're starting off. I'm hiding as much as possible of the new guest entrance for the domes. So I want the little viewing dome inside this habitat that's come in the latest free DLC, free update. But I don't want to have the huge, great big entrance that's sticking out. So I have lowered the barrier slightly below the train, and I have placed the entrance in there so it looks like it's kind of hidden away. And you're going to see I'm going to hide that whole thing away and imply that the guests are entering from a different point. So it's a pretty simple habitat in the end, this one, but there's quite a few different ideas going on. So you can see they've already placed the dome. I've reused this rock texture, or this kind of faux rock texture that I've used in both the quokkas and I used in the tapirs and stuff as well. So you saw me in the last episode give that a bit of a recolor, and I've used it again in this area. So I thought what makes sense is we're right alongside the river here, so this needs a bit of a retaining concrete wall. So I did that as well in this, what you see me doing right now. And it becomes a bit of again, it's a fairly small habitat, but lots of different ideas going on. Mainly because the problem was, well, there's a few sort of creative inspiration bits for this. Partly is I wanted to get the dome in, so I need something to hide that entrance away. But also, I'm actually lucky enough to have seen a Tasmanian Devil in the wild. If I remember, I will put a picture here and here of a very blurry view that I got late at night in Tasmania, in a place called Cradle Mountain. I think it was called Cradle Mountain. It was a little kind of eco lodge that I stayed in, and was lucky to see really late at night to see the Tasmanian Devil come and pick some food that we'd left out for it. The guy that was running the place said that they occasionally have Tasmanian Devils show up, and if you're patient enough and we sit up all night, that maybe we'll see one. And I was lucky enough to see one. So that is, again, a little bit of the inspiration behind this habitat, and that'll make sense as I continue the build, because I'm going to have a bit of a kind of homage to that experience in here, which is like a little implied cabin that you're going to see. So you might have seen it in the thumbnail, but the dome is in here. The guest viewing dome is in here. And this is a really great new feature. If you haven't checked this out, if you haven't checked out this DLC at all, then I would thoroughly recommend it. But this is one of those cool additions that Frontier are really good about adding these sort of cool quality of life additions for free to the game. So we can now have viewing domes in any habitat. It's not restricted. You can put them underwater. You can have them in the habitat as well. But as I said, the challenge is this great big massive entrance that you have for where the guests come into it. So I wanted to hide that away, and I thought the best way to hide that away was to have a building completely hide it. So you're going to see what I'm going to be doing here is I have to get away for it to make sense that the guests are going through a door into the entrance of this building. So, but I don't want it to look like that's the way they're coming in to the viewing dome. So there's a bunch of little tricks I've got to do here, a bunch of things I've got to do to kind of make this make sense. So this becomes both like a toilet block and a service building, and then the top level of this, the top floor of this building that you see me doing right now, will become the shelter for the animals as well. So sort of continuing the aesthetic that we've got in Tiguidou, using the what is this piece? This is the European rustic stone piece, this set that came with the European DLC. So I'm matching this up to the colours that I think I have this in. Where have I used this before? I think I've used this in the wetlands house, or whatever I called that, Life on the River or something, I think I called that. So reusing the aesthetic of that combined with my wooden sort of log cabin texture that I used for the tour building And I think that's the only place I've used this so far. But again, it's reusing a build set that I've created before. So you see me kind of, again, assembling these pieces. Makes it way quicker to build with like completely custom pieces. If you've already created your own little build set, I've said this loads of times, I still haven't actually done it, but I need to upload these to the workshop so that you peeps can use them as well. Should you please to do so. So yeah, this is where it's got kind of making sense. The thing, if you haven't seen Tiguidou before, I think we were on something like episode 25, and the challenge with Tiguidou was always the fact that, and this wasn't an accident, this was intentional, that the whole thing is set on a hill. It's not a massively drastic gradient, but the idea was that you would be able to be at the kind of entrance of the zoo and being able to see, like visually see, all the way down to the bottom of it. So to kind of have these little like vistas and these weenies and that sort of stuff. So what that means is, in a lot of cases, the bottom of the habitat, I mean, this is a perfect example. The top of the habitat is considerably higher up the hill than the rest of the lower end of the habitat. So if you see this path that I've got on the left-hand side, that is quite low, quite a lot lower than where the guest viewing area is, up there on the hill behind the glass. So there's kind of like challenges, like creative challenges that come out of that. So, but it's quite good for... I've found that it's quite good for kind of creative ideas to have these little challenges to set yourself. So what we've got is a building that's from one side looks like a single story building. So from the guest facing side of it up the hill looking into the habitat, it looks like a single story building. But from this lower level, it's a 2-story building. So here is where, this is obviously, if you remember from the start, this is where the entrance to the dome is hidden now behind that. And as I said, I need to make it make sense that guests are going to go in there. So I think that, well, the best way to do that is to make it look like it's an implied, well, it's a toilet facility. So you see I've got a couple of like implied storage bits here, just lining this out with some simple aesthetics, and then this inside space, like Tiguidou is a really small map. It's built on one of the scenario maps, so it's a really small space, and so everything is kind of premium. Like all the space is premium, so all of these little bits, if I can use this space more than once, then I need to. So this lower floor of this becomes the access into not only the viewing dome, but that implied toilet, but the upstairs of it is part of the habitat and where the animals sleep, if that makes sense. This will all probably make sense when we do a tour of this whole section at some point in another video. So that's that problem solved. I've hidden away the entrance, but now I need to actually give them an implied, a much more kind of aesthetically pleasing, and I think slightly more realistic, not 100% more realistic, but slightly more realistic version of what entrance into that sort of thing might look like. So I decided to use the barrel piece. I've made this look like it's a tube. The idea is it's supposed to be a pipe that you crawl through. Probably a bit far and probably a bit scary to go through there, but I thought that looked more fun, more interesting than the great big massive entrance that Frontier have given us. So yeah, you can see some guests already in there. I tested it out; it all worked okay. And it all kind of makes sense. Like from a viewing area, it just kind of feels like guests appear in there, and you don't see that they're coming into the toilet at the other end, like lower down the hill. Kind of makes sense. Hopefully that all makes sense as to what I've done. I think that's the best way to use these, is to like completely hide away that entrance in a way that it doesn't look like they're using it. So as I said, the upper floor of this is going to be where the Tassies sleep. So I needed some implied way that the keepers can get into here. As I've talked about a few times, and I think I've done this in both Tiguidou and Zimba, I want to make sure that where possible, I'm implying potential different entrances into the habitats for the keepers to get wherever they need to get to in the most like practical and sensible way that they can. So obviously the game only gives us one entrance, but my imagination, letting my kind of imagination go and saying, well, I'd want to be able to get into, without having to walk through the whole habitat, I'd want to be able to get into this, this sleeping area for the Tassie. So I put a little set of steps in. It's a bit janky and wonky looking at that point, but in the build, but it does get fixed a bit more, so it doesn't look quite so wonky. So putting some barriers in and that sort of thing as we go. So talking about the Tasmanian Devil in particular, so and funny enough, actually, I spoke to someone recently about Tasmanian Devils, and they didn't realise they were actually a real animal. They obviously are. They're not just a cartoon character. We have them in Planet Zoo. They're surprisingly realistic looking. They're weird little creatures, really kind of cute, but like actually quite surprisingly like strong teeth and all that sort of quite. They're meat eaters. They're carnivores. They only exist in Tasmania. If you don't know where Tasmania is, it's a tiny little island that exists off of the south of Australia. It's the bit on the bottom of Australia. And the Tasmanian Devils are quite endangered, and there's a major thing. Obviously, they've got a very limited space that they exist in. And when I was there in Tasmania, like 7 or 8 years ago, they were kind of in real problems because not only have they've got kind of limited space and habitat, but they were having a real problem with facial cancer that they didn't really understand where it was coming from. I think there's been some new insights into that recently. But it was very, very unusual. It's very unusual to see a Tasmanian Devil in the wild anyway, but to see a Tasmanian Devil that didn't have a big facial tumour on it was even more special. And I was lucky enough to see one, and it came quite close, and I didn't get a very particularly good picture, as you'll have seen, because it was dark and blurry and about 3 o'clock in the morning. But they're really cool, and they're like really cool little animals, and they chomped on the chicken carcass that we left out for them, and we didn't see them for very long, but they were around for a little while. And they make lots of weird noises, very much like you get in Planet Zoo. They make kind of strange snarling noises that you wouldn't think would be coming out of such a tiny little creature. But yeah, that was a really like amazing experience, and I wanted to kind of instill some of that into this build, which you'll see me work on in a minute. So just working on the interior space of this. If you've seen any of my stuff before, then thank you very much for hanging around. But most of what I do is like detail heavy, so I really enjoy internal spaces. I really enjoy kind of imagining how keepers would use these in reality. So I spend quite a lot of time thinking about, mostly just because it's kind of fun, but not like obsessing about it, but how actually like the functionality of these things would work. So yeah, there needs to be some ventilation, there needs to be some heating, there needs to be some ways of getting in and out of this space, there needs to be some things for cleaning up, that sort of stuff. So as you see, I've just put a bit of ventilation in. Little trip actually, so this is like a little tiny little detail, but like you can see me adding in here something that is implying the point at which this is coming through the wall. So I feel like it's just a tiny little detail, but makes such a difference to how realistic that looks. So if you look around you, if you looked at a piece of air conditioning coming through a wall, it wouldn't just like come straight through the wall. There'd be a plate alongside that, like where the lip is between the hole that's been cut and where the vent's coming through. So those are the sorts of little details that I obsess over. Probably don't get really noticeable, not particularly noticeable and long lasting, but I think they kind of overall add to the aesthetic of the build. So yeah, again, thinking like there's going to want to be a way of cleaning in here. There's some lights in here. There needs to be a switch going in. So, and it's funny actually, the more you play Planet Zoo, the more you start to accumulate these little things in your blueprint set. So I've used like this little switch. I think I built it when I made the tropical dome, and I've used it probably 100 times. Everywhere I put a light, I put a switch for it because it just makes sense to me. So you can see the little dome. Like there's going to be some cinematics at the end. The Tassies themselves are super cool. They are slightly one of those animals that, and I think I mentioned this about the quokka, but the quokkas are really seem like they've got a diverse set of animations. I've experienced quite a lot of times that the Tasmanian Devils kind of looping their animations, getting stuck a little bit. What tends to happen, I think, with Frontier release of DLC is that the the first patch that comes out really tends to kind of optimize the animations for the animals and stuff. So you've seen me put the net over the top, and now I'm going into the bit that's the real homage to my kind of cabin experience with the Tasmanian Devil. So I have picked up one of my previous build assets before for this zoo. So this is one of my 2 cabin builds that we've got up on the hill for guest cabins, and I've stripped that right down to basics, and I want it as a little aesthetic backdrop for this habitat. And it's not entirely accurate. I will put a picture of what the cabin looked like that I stayed in. It's not entirely accurate. It's just a homage to that. And it's supposed to be a bit of a light backdrop. I think I have got one little cinematic in the end of the video that shows you this in the night and things. I didn't want it to be particularly like visually dominating, so I've kept it pretty small, and I've stripped it back. And lower down the hill here will be another habitat. As I said before, everything in Tiguidou is crammed in, really tight and cozy. Everything's a bit probably a little bit stingy on the sizes and things. So if you're going to pick this up from the workshop at some point and look at it when I upload it, don't worry too much about the fact that I've underdone the budget a little bit on the allocation of space. So a few cinematics at the end here, and I will leave you with some of these, but them playing around with the scratching the bark and that sort of thing. They're so cool. They're really cool looking. Again, Frontier massively knocked these animals out of the park. The models are so good that they just make you want to keep buying these DLCs. And the more there are smaller animals, the more I enjoy it. So thank you very much for watching, guys. Do stick around for the cinematics. There's a few more of these, and hopefully it won't be too long before the next video. Do let me know actually which are the animals you want to see next, even if it's not one of the Oceania animals. I've got a bunch of things that I've been thinking about, kind of re-inspired to play again a bit. So thank you very much for watching. My name is Dave. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Take it easy.